The scent of vaporized rosin flux and heated copper was the only constant in the room as I held the magnifying loupe over the exposed motherboard of the DSLR camera. I adjusted the ceramic tip of my soldering iron, holding it steady at exactly 350 degrees Celsius. The lighting in the penthouse studio was entirely artificial, three massive, diffused ring lights set to a perfect daylight color temperature, casting zero shadows across my blue anti-static work mat. I prefer hardware. Hardware obeys the laws of physics. If a trace is broken, continuity fails. If a capacitor is blown, the voltage drops. Humans, conversely, are infinitely unpredictable. They introduce chaotic variables into otherwise stable environments. The camera had supposedly suffered a standard power surge, destroying the primary capture card and the internal Wi-Fi module. My firm had been contracted for an emergency hardware bypass, but as I traced the microscopic circuitry beneath the magnification of the loupe, a glaring discrepancy emerged in the physical data. The burn marks on the PCB were localized entirely around the network interface controller. It was inconsistent with a randomized electrical spike from the building's power grid. The logic board isn't just fried, I said, setting the soldering iron into its heavy iron cradle. The metallic click echoed in the heavily soundproofed room. It was intentionally overloaded. Autumn Robinson stopped pacing the length of the hardwood floor. She was wearing a perfectly tailored black silk blouse and sharply creased dark trousers, her posture carrying the rigid tension of a CEO facing a hostile corporate takeover. She stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the busy NYC skyline, the glass coated in a specialized reflective film to prevent long-lens photography from the neighboring high-rises. "Are you telling me my camera didn't just break?" Autumn asked, her voice tight, maintaining a very specific, modulated professional cadence. "You're telling me it was attacked?" "I am stating a technical fact based on the physical evidence," I replied, pulling a digital multimeter from my tactical gear bag. I pressed the red and black probes against the power supply pins of the camera. 0 voltage. The hardware is a total loss. Someone ran a continuous deauthentication script against your local network. They flooded the camera's internal module with connection requests until it entered a thermal runaway loop and burned itself out. Autumn walked over to the heavy oak desk where I had set up my diagnostic station. She rested her hands on the edge of the wood, her knuckles turning white under the studio lights. She was 36, and she operated a media empire from this single room. When her assistant had contacted my security firm earlier that afternoon, the brief had been explicit regarding non-disclosure agreements and absolute discretion. "Jacob," she said, using my first name for the first time since I arrived. She looked directly at me. "My platform is highly lucrative. I rank in the top 0.1% of independent creators globally. The content I produce is strictly age-restricted. It is designed for mature audiences. If my real name, my physical location, or my unreleased raw files are leaked, it doesn't just damage my brand. It destroys my physical safety." I met her gaze. Her eyes were sharp, scanning my face for judgment, searching for the subtle shift in demeanor that most people exhibited when they encountered her line of work. I offered none. Judgment is a useless metric. Data is data, I stated calmly, packing the multimeter back into its molded foam slot. A gigabyte of offshore banking records weighs exactly the same on a hard drive as a gigabyte of your video files. Both are comprised of ones and zeros. Both require multi-layered encryption to transit safely. I do not care what you film. I care about the structural integrity of your network, which is currently compromised. The attack vector required proximity. The perpetrator either had access to your local Wi-Fi password, or they breached your primary router through a vulnerability in your smart home grid. Autumn exhaled a slow, controlled breath. The defensive tension in her shoulders dropped by a fraction of an inch, recognizing that I was operating purely on logistics, not morality. "I've been receiving messages on my secure admin dashboard. An anonymous user. They bypassed my moderation team entirely. They keep sending me strings of numbers." "Show me," I instructed, standing up and stepping back from the desk to give her the necessary physical space to access her terminal. She walked around the desk, waking her primary workstation. She entered a 32-character alphanumeric password, followed by a physical biometric fingerprint scan on an external reader. The screen illuminated, displaying a stark, black-and-white administration interface. She clicked into a direct message thread from a user designated only as null. I leaned in, maintaining a respectful 12-inch distance from her shoulder, I read the messages. They weren't random numbers. These are subnet masks, I said, my cognitive gears shifting instantly into threat analysis. And local port assignments. They are mapping your internal network topography. They are telling you that they are already inside your digital perimeter. How? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. A phishing link clicked by an assistant, I hypothesized, my eyes scanning the ambient devices in the room. A compromised third-party application on your phone. Or an intercepted Bluetooth handshake. I stepped back, pulling a small, standalone diagnostic tablet from my bag to run a localized packet sniff. I pride myself on anticipating every variable. I build unbreachable walls. I rely on my preparation to ensure I am never caught off guard. It was a critical miscalculation. I had assumed the attacker was only monitoring the network traffic. I had underestimated the depth of the intrusion. Before the tablet could finish its boot sequence, the 3 massive ring lights illuminating the studio simultaneously flickered. The color temperature shifted rapidly from cool, balanced white to a harsh, blinding, saturated red. The motorized blackout blinds on the floor-to-ceiling windows, the only physical barrier between Autumn and the city outside, began to rise on their own with a loud mechanical hum, exposing the glass to the neighboring towers. I didn't touch the remote, Autumn said, taking a sudden step backward, her hand reaching out instinctively to grip the edge of the desk. My pulse spiked. It was a sharp, unfamiliar jolt of pure adrenaline. The system had bypassed my mental model. They weren't just in the router. They had a root-level Trojan embedded in the automated lighting bridge. I had failed to air-gap the IoT devices the moment I identified the deauth script. Physical containment. Right now, I commanded, my voice dropping an octave into absolute, tactical calm, masking the sudden surge of self-directed anger. I didn't wait for her permission. I moved past her, dropping to my knees beneath the heavy oak desk. I bypassed the software interface completely. Software can be manipulated. Copper wire cannot. I located the primary uninterruptible power supply unit powering the room's smart grid. I reached around the back, found the heavy gauge power cable, and ripped it directly from the wall socket with a harsh yank. The red ring lights died instantly. The motorized blinds ground to a halt halfway up the glass, leaving a jagged view of the New York skyline. The only illumination left in the room was the ambient, pale glow of the city lights bleeding through the windows. The smart home bridge is isolated, I said, standing up in the dim light. I pulled a compact flashlight from my belt and clicked it on, aiming the beam strictly at the floor to avoid destroying our night vision or signaling our position to anyone outside. Your environment is temporarily secure. Autumn was breathing heavily, her back pressed against the far wall of the studio. She was a woman accustomed to total control over her image, her business, and her space. Watching a hostile, faceless entity manipulate her physical environment had breached her baseline tolerance. They were trying to raise the blinds, she said, her voice shaking slightly, the professional facade cracking under the weight of the physical intrusion. If someone was on the roof of the opposite building with a telephoto lens, they would have captured the interior layout of your studio. I finished the logic path, my jaw tight, and potentially, your face, unedited and unmasked. It's an escalation tactic. Stalking relies on the illusion of omnipotence. They want you to feel observed. They want to induce panic. I walked over to my gear bag. I pulled out a heavy, matte black hardware firewall unit and a 50-foot spool of shielded Cat6 Ethernet cable. "What are you doing?" she asked, watching me unspool the blue wire. "I am severing your reliance on wireless protocols," I explained, plugging one end of the cable into her primary workstation and the other into the black box. Wi-Fi is a critical vulnerability. From this moment forward, your broadcasting workstation is hardwired. This hardware firewall operates on a closed-source logic board. It does not accept external commands. If anyone attempts a packet injection, the box physically drops the connection at the hardware level. Autumn slowly stepped away from the wall. She walked toward me, stopping just outside the beam of my flashlight. The ambient light caught the sharp angles of her face. "You charge $500 an hour for emergency consultations, Jacob. You came here to replace a camera motherboard. We are now moving into a full-scale network lockdown. The parameters of the job have shifted," I stated, locking the Ethernet cable into place with a definitive click. I made an error in my initial threat assessment. I assumed a shallow breach. I will not make a second error. I do not leave a compromised site until the perimeter is absolute. That is my professional standard. I have a live broadcast scheduled for tomorrow night, she said, crossing her arms defensively. It's a subscriber-only milestone event. I stand to lose mid-five figures if I cancel, not to mention the algorithmic penalty from the platform. I can't afford to go dark. You will not cancel, I told her, meeting her eyes in the low light. I will construct a segmented VLAN for your broadcast stream. I will monitor the network traffic locally while you are live. If the hostile entity attempts to re-enter the data stream, I will capture their routing headers. You want to use my live event as a honeypot, she summarized, her sharp business acumen returning instantly, overriding the panic. It is the most efficient method to force them to reveal their origin point, I confirmed. Autumn looked at the heavy black firewall box, then at the severed power cord of her smart home bridge resting on the floor. She was calculating the risk variables. Trust was a foreign concept to her, a luxury her profession rarely afforded and often punished. I have a biometric safe full of encrypted physical drives, she said quietly. Raw footage, financial ledgers, private correspondence. If I give you administrative access to my local network, you have the keys to my entire life. I set my flashlight down on the desk, the beam pointing away from us. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my mobile phone, and placed it face down next to the flashlight, severing my own external distractions. I gave her my complete, undivided attention. I am a licensed cybersecurity contractor, I said, my voice level and absolute. I operate under a strict non-disclosure agreement, backed by $1 million liability bond. But beyond the legal and financial structure, I offer you this practical reality. I have zero interest in your raw footage. I have no interest in judging your business model or consuming your content. I am only interested in identifying the threat and neutralizing it permanently. You will retain the master encryption keys. I will only access the routing logs. You are in control. Autumn studied my face for a long, silent minute. She was looking for a crack in the armor, a sign of deceit, hidden motive, or the voyeuristic curiosity she likely encountered on a daily basis. She found exactly what I presented: zero variables, pure logic, and a rigid adherence to protocol. Okay, she said, her voice steadying. We secure the network, but no more wireless smart lights. I'll use manual switches. Agreed, I said, practical, analog, and unhackable. For the next 24 hours, the penthouse became a fortified bunker. I did not leave the premises. I spent the night configuring the physical firewall, establishing a deeply encrypted virtual private network tunnel for her broadcast, and setting up an aggressive intrusion detection system on my own terminal. I slept for exactly 4 hours on the modern leather sofa in her secondary office, using the silent vibration alarm on my tactical watch to wake me at dawn. When I walked into the main studio kitchen on Wednesday morning, Autumn was already awake. She was wearing a thick, oversized gray cashmere cardigan over dark yoga pants, her hair tied up in a messy, practical knot. She was standing by a high-end commercial espresso machine, the scent of dark roasted beans filling the room. She turned as I entered, holding out a matte black ceramic mug. Black, she said. No sugar. I analyzed your behavior yesterday and assumed. Your data analysis is correct, I said, taking the mug. Our fingers brushed briefly against the warm ceramic. The contact was purely logistical, a transfer of an object, but my brain logged the physical data regardless. Her skin was warm, her pulse visible at the inside of her wrist. I took a deliberate step back, maintaining my established physical boundary. Thank you. I have my schedule for the day, she said, leaning against the cold marble counter. I need to record 3 hours of pre-planned video content before the live event tonight. Usually, my assistant Clara handles the camera operation remotely from her apartment, but since you killed the external network bridge and hardwired everything, she's locked out. I will act as your temporary physical operator, I said, taking a sip of the bitter, perfect coffee. I can manage the focal lengths, the ISO adjustments, and the lighting arrays manually. She hesitated, her teeth catching her lower lip. It was a subtle micro-expression of profound discomfort. Jacob, the content I record, it requires a specific environment. It's highly stylized boudoir and lingerie videography. Having a stranger in the room while I work, it disrupts the psychological space I need to perform. I can construct a physical privacy barrier, I offered immediately, recognizing the boundary issue and applying a practical, mechanical fix without taking offense. I will set the primary camera on a locked, heavy-duty tripod. I will run a 50-foot HDMI auxiliary cable to an external monitor situated in the hallway outside the studio. I can check the focus, exposure, histograms, and audio levels from outside the closed door. You will have complete, uninterrupted privacy in the studio. You only need to give me vocal cues to start and stop the recording. Autumn stared at me. The defensive tension bled out of her posture so fast she almost slumped against the marble counter. You would do that? You would just sit in the hallway? Your comfort and autonomy are essential to your workflow, I stated logically. My physical presence should not impede your business operations. I will build the external monitoring station now. I spent the next 3 hours sitting on the cold hardwood floor of her hallway, staring at a technical monitor that displayed only the waveform of the video signal and the exposure histogram. I did not look at the actual video feed. I listened to her voice through the heavy oak door as she called out, "Commands. Start recording. Adjust exposure down. 1. Stop. Stop recording." I followed her instructions with absolute precision. I treated her highly stigmatized art form with the exact same mechanical respect and rigid operational security I would give to a corporate banking audit. When she finally opened the door, she was wearing a long silk robe, her makeup flawless, but her eyes were visibly tired. She looked down at me, sitting on the floor with my laptop and the external monitor. "We got everything we needed," she said quietly, her tone stripped of the performative edge. "Thank you, Jacob." "The data is secured on the local encrypted drive," I replied, standing up and brushing off my dark jeans. "We have 5 hours until your live broadcast. I need to run a final stress test on the hardware firewall and prepare the honeypot." The escalation occurred at exactly 7 p.m., 2 hours before her scheduled event. I was sitting at my diagnostic station in the corner of the studio. Autumn was at her desk, organizing her show notes. My terminal window suddenly began scrolling rapidly with dense blocks of red text. "Multiple ping requests," I announced, my fingers flying over my mechanical keyboard. "They are attempting to brute force the external IP address of your router. They are running a dictionary attack against the SSH port." "Can they get in?" Autumn asked, standing up abruptly. "No," I assured her, my eyes locked on the scrolling data. "The hardware firewall is identifying the anomalous packet signatures and dropping them. They are hitting a reinforced steel door. They cannot breach the perimeter." My mobile phone, sitting face down on the desk next to my laptop, vibrated violently against the wood. I ignored it. It vibrated again. And again. A continuous, rapid, aggressive sequence. I flipped the phone over. The caller ID was restricted. I answered it, putting it on speaker and hitting the local record button simultaneously. "Sanders speaking," I said, my voice an impassive wall. A synthesized, digitized voice echoed from the small speaker, distorted by pitch-shifting software. "You're blocking the feed. Tell the model to open the port. Or, I send the package to her mother in Ohio." The line went dead with a sharp click. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Autumn swayed slightly, her hand gripping the edge of the desk so hard her joints cracked audibly. "He has my mother's address," she whispered, her voice completely hollowed out by terror. "My family. They think I run a digital marketing agency. They are conservative, Jacob. They are deeply religious. If he sends them the raw files of my content, if he shows them what I actually do." She couldn't finish the sentence. The panic attack was immediate, physiological, and severe. Her breathing became rapid. Shallow gasps. She staggered back from the desk, her legs hitting the edge of the sofa, and she collapsed onto the cushions, pulling her knees tightly to her chest. For the first time in my professional career, the tactical calm fractured. A sharp, violent spike of pure, uncalculated rage hit my chest. It wasn't about the compromised network. It was about her. My hand gripped the edge of my laptop so hard the aluminum chassis groaned. My heart rate hit 130 beats per minute. I felt an overwhelming, irrational urge to find the person on the other end of that phone and physically dismantle them. I had to close my eyes for exactly 1 second. Breathe. Identify the variable. Re-establish control. I could not protect her. If I operated on emotion, I forced the tactical parameters back into place, shoving the fierce, possessive anger into a locked mental subroutine. I moved. I crossed the room in 3 strides. I did not offer a motivational speech. I did not tell her to calm down, which is a useless, patronizing command during a physiological panic response. I knelt on the floor directly in front of the sofa, placing myself in her line of sight, physically blocking out the rest of the room. "Look at the blinking light on the firewall box," I instructed, my voice lower, rougher than usual, betraying a fraction of the emotion I was fighting to suppress. She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head, trapped in the internal spiral of fear. "Autumn," I said, projecting absolute, immovable certainty. "Look at the light." She opened her eyes, tears spilling over her lashes, her chest heaving. She focused on the solid green LED on the black box I had installed across the room. "That light indicates that your local data is locked," I told her, speaking in a slow, rhythmic cadence to help regulate her breathing, utilizing sensory grounding techniques. "He does not have your raw files. He is running a bluff. He likely used a reverse lookup on your LLC public registration to find your family's address. It is a scare tactic. Because his digital breach failed, he is losing his leverage, so he is escalating to psychological warfare. He called your phone," she choked out, her fingers digging into her arms. "How did he get your number?" "I am a registered cybersecurity contractor," I replied, keeping my hands open and resting on my own knees, ensuring I made no unpredictable movements. "My business number is public record." He pinged the IP, saw my firm's specific routing signature on the firewall, and looked me up. "He is trying to intimidate me into abandoning the contract." I leaned forward slightly. He made a critical error. "Autumn. By calling my phone, he engaged with my primary system. He crossed my perimeter." "What does that mean?" she asked, her breathing beginning to slow, anchoring to the steady, relentless logic of my words. "It means he is no longer just a ghost hiding on your network," I stated, the cold anger returning to my voice. "He is an active threat interacting with my infrastructure. I am going to hunt him." I stood up and walked back to my laptop. The live broadcast was no longer just a defense mechanism or a business requirement. It was the trap. "We proceed with the live event at 9, I told her, my fingers flying across the terminal, writing custom scripts. "I am opening a single, highly monitored port on the firewall. I am creating a honeypot. It will look like a vulnerability in your video streaming software. But it isn't passive. When he tries to exploit it, I will not just trace his IP, which is undoubtedly masked by a VPN. I have embedded a zero-day payload disguised as a media codec. When his system attempts the handshake, the payload will force a WebRTC stun request. It will bypass his VPN tunnel, leak his true local IP address, and transmit the hard-coded MAC address of his physical motherboard directly to me." Autumn stood up slowly, wrapping her arms around herself. The vulnerability in the room was palpable, a stark contrast to the polished, untouchable persona she projected online. "Jacob, if you fail, if he gets through the port before the payload executes." "I do not fail," I said simply. It wasn't arrogance. It was a statement of historical fact, reinforced by a desperate need to keep her safe. "You run your broadcast. You maintain your professional composure. You hold the attention of your audience. I will handle the ghost." At 9 p.m., the broadcast went live. Autumn sat in front of the bypassed DSLR camera, bathed in the soft, flattering light of the single ring light we had kept hardwired. She was phenomenal. The moment the red recording indicator clicked on, she transformed. She engaged with her high-tier subscribers, answering questions, projecting absolute confidence, warmth, and untouchable allure. She was a master of her craft, utilizing her environment flawlessly. I sat in the dark corner of the studio, the glow of my dual monitors illuminating my face. I was blind to her performance. My eyes were locked on the raw data packets flowing through the single open port. At 9:42 p.m., the trap was triggered. A massive influx of data hit the open port. It was a sophisticated injection attack, attempting to mirror the video feed and rip it to an external, offshore server. "Contact," I whispered to myself in the dark. I didn't block it immediately. I let the hostile entity think they had breached the wall. I let them establish a sustained connection for exactly 12 seconds. I watched the progress bar of the malicious payload transfer. Payload executed. The counterscript surged back through the established connection. It hit his browser, executed the WebRTC bypass, and shattered his VPN tunnel. It pinged his local router, retrieved the hard-coded MAC address of his machine, and queried an illicit ISP database dump I maintained on an encrypted drive for extreme contingencies. The terminal window flashed green. The IP address resolved. The physical location populated. 142. West 81st Street, apartment. 4B, New York, NY. He wasn't in Russia. He wasn't in Estonia. He was 3 miles away on the Upper West Side. I hit the physical kill switch on the port, severing his connection with extreme prejudice. The hostile data stream flatlined instantly. "I have him," I said aloud. Autumn didn't break character. She finished her sentence, smiled at the camera, and gracefully ended the broadcast. The moment the feed went dark, she spun her heavy leather chair around to face me. "You found him?" she asked, her voice breathless, the professional mask dropping instantly. "I have his physical address. I have his hardware identification number. I have the routing logs proving he attempted to steal digital property, and I have the audio file of the cyber extortion protocol," I stated, pulling a portable encrypted hard drive from my bag and initiating a secure, redundant data backup. "What do we do now?" she asked, walking quickly over to my desk. "Do we call the police? Will they even understand this?" "Digital harassment is notoriously difficult to prosecute without an airtight forensic dossier," I explained, pulling a thick stack of high-quality paper from my bag and loading it into her local, hardwired laser printer. "I am generating that dossier right now. I have a contact. Detective Miller, Cyber Crimes Division. He knows my work." When I hand him a compiled package with the exact MAC address, the WebRTC leak logs, and the extortion audio, they won't just file a report and ask questions. They will execute a no-knock warrant. The printer hummed to life, spitting out page after page of indisputable, mathematical proof. I stood up, pulling a heavy manila envelope from my bag. I began sliding the printed documents into the folder, aligning the edges perfectly. "I am going to deliver this to the precinct right now," I told her, sealing the envelope. "The threat is neutralized. Your network is completely locked down. He cannot access your smart home grid, he cannot access your cameras, and by tomorrow morning, his physical hardware will be sitting in a police evidence locker." Autumn stared at the manila envelope in my hand. The nightmare that had been suffocating her for a week was reduced to 50 pages of raw data inside a paper folder. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "You're leaving. The parameters of the contract are fulfilled," I stated, my voice completely level, betraying none of the heavy, uncomfortable weight settling deep in my chest. I slung my tactical bag over my shoulder. "Your environment is secure." "Jacob," she said, stepping directly into my path. I stopped. The physical proximity was unavoidable unless I stepped backward, which my tactical instincts refused to do. I looked down at her. "You didn't just fix a camera," she said, her voice dropping into a quiet, intense register that had nothing to do with her online persona. "You gave me my life back. You looked at the most stigmatized, judged part of my existence, and you didn't flinch. You didn't ask inappropriate questions. You just built a wall to keep me safe." "It is my job to build walls," I said quietly, keeping my hands firmly gripping the thick nylon strap of my bag to prevent them from moving toward her. "I know," she said. She reached out, her hand resting against my chest, right over my sternum. The warmth of her palm bled through the dark fabric of my shirt. "But you're the first person I've ever met who built a wall to protect me, instead of building one to keep me out." I stopped breathing for 2 seconds. The logic circuits in my brain shorted out entirely. I looked at her hand, then up at her eyes. The yearning was a physical ache in my jaw, a tightening of muscles I didn't know I possessed. I wanted to drop the bag. I wanted to close the distance. I wanted to stay in this room with her indefinitely, but I operate on respect. She was my client. The power dynamic was inherently skewed by the trauma and the crisis we had just navigated. She needed safety, not a complication. I slowly raised my hand, my fingers wrapping gently around her wrist. I didn't push her away. I just held her hand against my chest for one single, suspended moment, acknowledging the contact, acknowledging the profound shift in my own internal programming, before gently lowering her arm. "I will call you when Detective Miller confirms the warrant execution," I said, my voice noticeably rougher than intended. I walked around her, opened the heavy front door, and left the penthouse, stepping back into the chaotic noise of the city. Friday afternoon, 2 p.m. I was sitting at the primary workbench in my apartment, staring at a blank terminal window. The silence, which had always been my preferred operational state, now felt defective. It felt profoundly empty. My phone vibrated against the metal desk. Detective Miller. Sanders. Miller's gruff voice came through the speaker. Your dossier was bulletproof as usual. The WebRTC exploit was a nice touch. We hit the apartment on 81st Street an hour ago, seized 3 hard drives, a dedicated server tower, and the suspect. Turns out he was a former high-tier subscriber who got banned for violating the terms of service on our platform. He held a grudge. He's in holding now. Extortion and cyberstalking charges are pending, and we have the physical evidence to make them stick. Understood, I said, staring at the blank screen. Thank you, Detective. Tell your client she can sleep easy, Miller said, and hung up. I set the phone down. The objective was officially complete. I opened my billing software to generate the final invoice, but my fingers hovered over the keyboard. A sharp, confident knock at my door interrupted the silence. I pulled up the hallway security camera feed. Autumn was standing outside. She was wearing a sharp, tailored beige trench coat, holding a small cardboard box. I unbolted the door and pulled it open. The detective called me, she said, stepping into my apartment before I could invite her in. She looked around, taking in the Spartan cleanliness of my space, the towering server racks humming in the corner, the anti-static mats covering the floor. It's over. Yes, I confirmed, closing the heavy door behind her. The hostile entity is permanently removed from the board. She turned to face me, holding out the small cardboard box. What is this? I asked, looking at the package. Open it, she instructed. I took the box and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of custom-cut foam, was a brand-new, top-of-the-line DSLR camera logic board. It was the exact model that had been destroyed in her studio, the one I had originally come to repair. Your hardware is bypassed, I said, looking at the complex circuitry. The system is functioning perfectly. You don't need a replacement board. I know, she said, taking a deliberate step closer. The trench coat fell open slightly, revealing a dark, elegant dress underneath. I didn't buy it for the camera. I bought it as a retainer. I frowned, calculating the logic, searching for the variable I was missing. A retainer for what? For my new director of digital security, she said, her voice steady, carrying absolute, immovable certainty. My business is growing, Jacob. I am expanding my platform. I need someone on staff who understands my network, someone who doesn't judge my content, someone who builds walls. She reached out, gently taking the cardboard box from my hands and setting it down on the workbench. She turned back to me, eliminating the final foot of physical distance between us. But more importantly, she said, looking up into my eyes, stripping away all professional pretense, I need to know that you won't just disappear behind your own firewall now that the job is done. I looked at her. I saw the intelligence, the resilience, the absolute fearlessness of a woman who owned her choices and demanded respect for them. I felt the rigid, isolated programming of my own life rewriting itself in real time. I had spent my life believing that systems could be made perfect and that humans were just liabilities. I was wrong. Vulnerability is the price of connection. No system is perfectly secure, but I could stand at the gate. My firm's retainer fee is substantial, I noted, my voice dropping to a quiet, vibrating rumble. I run a highly lucrative platform, she countered. A brilliant, genuine smile breaking across her face, lighting up the dim room. I can afford you. I reached out, my hand resting gently against her waist. There was no hesitation this time. The contract was signed, but the terms had fundamentally changed. Then the perimeter is permanently secured, I said. She leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against my shoulder. A simple, profound gesture of absolute trust. I stood there, holding her, the quiet, steady hum of the servers providing the perfect background noise for a system that was finally perfectly balanced. The end.